So seeing as it's 5:30, we will go ahead and call the meeting to order and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. McLean, may I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Mrs. Crane,
Here.
Ms. Catalina,
Here.
Mrs. McGinnis,
Here.
Mrs. Egan,
Here.
Mr. Heyer,
Here.
Mr. Need,
Here.
Mrs. Horst.
Here. This meeting is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community hearing. There is time for public participation as indicated on the agenda in items 3 and 9. So now we will move into our workshop, Moving Learning Forward. I'll turn it over to Dr. Ryan to introduce that. And so trustees, it looks like everyone is muted but me. We'll turn it over to the administration.
Thank you, President Horst. It's my pleasure tonight to open our meeting, our workshop. And as you alluded to, it's been a long time since we've been able to talk about more of the educational value of our school system in terms of what we can do and what we're planning to do forward. And I am excited about that. Obviously, the reason for this conversation tonight weighs heavy on my heart, knowing that, we're looking at now going on almost a year since that March 13th evening when we went out of school. And since then, it's been a challenge of being in school, distance learning, virtual learning, the whole gamut that we've brought to bear. And to the credit of our staff, our teachers, our administrators, and our instructional services group, they've done a fine job from those early days in March of really kind of building a program over the last year that we can be proud of. It is, given the circumstances, the very best that I've seen. I'm so pleased overall with the efforts of our teachers coming and bringing it every day within our distance learning. But albeit our best attempt, we have learned, over the year that our students, our families, and especially, the experience that our teachers are able to give still in a lot of ways does not necessarily meet the bill of what our kids really long-term, what we really desire in terms of their growth over year. And looking at that, we wanted to share with the board and our community this evening some data points. And again, right now, I think it'd be fair to say we're really on the surface level of getting a full assessment of the impact of this pandemic and our instructional modalities over the last year. But we're going down the road of examining data as it pertains to the progress of our students and beginning looking at short and long-term ways that we want to really bring to bear the energies and focuses of our school district and making sure that our students and our families are going to be okay long-term. And I'm here to report right from the start of the summation of our presentation, our students will be okay because we will work tirelessly and we will work continuously and we will work until we feel like that job is done moving forward. And my instructions to our team, as you're going to hear from Nancy Mahoney in our instructional services wing this evening, has been really think out of the box. Nothing's off the table when it comes to getting back in our stride. And although we've done a lot of great things, we really want to look at, what opportunities do we not only have to engage our students moving forward in a way to really look at both the academics and the social emotional pieces for our students, but really what can we gain in terms of perspective, know-how, and processes moving forward that not only will serve to help meet the needs of our students today and next week and next month, but really what can we learn to bring to bear over the long term to really improve our systems as a whole. And I think that has to be the attitude and spirit of any difficult situation, is that there's always opportunities to be found in ways that we can really look at making it a better world moving forward, as opposed to just looking at what were our current circumstances and what we've been left to deal with pushing on. But I'm very excited. This evening, again, the beginning of a conversation. As everybody knows, we're right in the throes of managing and navigating the pandemic in real time today. But at the same time, there's not going to be the opportunity to just draw lines when the sun comes out and everything is fully clear to then turn our attention. That attention needs to start now. So it's my pleasure to kind of introduce Nancy Mahoney, and I'll let her introduce her colleague team that has the presentation shared tonight. But I'm very excited to really engage on this. And that's what I really want to get in that habit so that our community can see, because a lot of times in our workshops, we don't have as many community participants that they can kind of see firsthand how this works. So Ms. Mahoney, if you want to click on mic and begin, and we'll begin that presentation. So thank you, President Horst and the board.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. It's so good to be with our Board of Education for this workshop. I'd like to warmly welcome Wendy Osterman to the table, who will be partnering with us tonight. Wendy, as you know, is our new administrator of data structure and analysis. And of course, Stacy Puzio, who's our student growth guru of well-being and student growth here. So the three of us are going to walk through this workshop together. We're very excited to be with you tonight as we begin our second semester. And I'd like to remind you today that it is January 25th. It's been almost a year since the pandemic has hit our schools. And tonight we want to share our thinking, our focus, and our mindset as we move forward in supporting the learning for our students and our staff. We want this to be conversational with you. If at any time you have a question, you have a thought, we'd like you to jump right in, as this is a workshop that we join together. Again, just thinking about the learning and moving forward. So Heidi, if you could flip to the next slide. So we think now more than ever, as we have returned back to face-to-face, we must remain human-centered. Our staff, our families, and our students have experienced almost a full year like no other. And even you as a board probably sit in that boat as well, never experiencing a year quite like this one. We all have our own story, our own struggle, and our successes. And I'd like to start out with these quotes as they highlight a lot of what we've been currently thinking about. And I'm wondering if one of you could just jump in and read that first quote.
We must greet the students where they are, not where we think they should be.
Yes, students are not behind. They are on their own personal learning curriculum, and we will engage their current place on that learning continuum.
Thank you. How about the second one?
We cannot be in a hurry to fix kids and make up for the lost time. The time was not lost. There was much learned. We need to nurture resilience and help them adjust to a post-pandemic world.
We recognize our students are learning to be resilient and how to keep going in this challenging setting that they're living in right now.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Stacy. How about the third?
Teaching is an essential connection between what is and what can be.
And I think that highlights the necessary component in our classrooms, whether it be in a distance learning, face-to-face, in a virtual world, is the power of the teacher. And they make the magic, and they set the tone, and how important it is that we support our teachers in this time as we move forward. And how about the last one?
Their brains didn't stop. They didn't go into hibernation.
And this we believe to be true, and we will continue to move forward.
Thanks everyone for that. I think it's important that we look at our mission-driven, our 4 pillars of excellence, Board of Education. This is our strategic plan. We still remain very excited about it. And it's time to, I think, come back to this with a renewed focus. Prior to the pandemic, every building in our district had a detailed plan that embraced goals and strategies within our 4 pillars. We want to revisit, we want to revise as necessary now. A reminder that our strategic plan is our foundation of who we are in Clarkston, and it does drive our decisions, as you will hear tonight. We remain committed to the whole person not only to students, but our staff and our community. We are going to continue to pursue very strong foundational and academic skills. Student-focused learning is probably more critical than ever as we support each and every child now, and again, supporting their future pathway as we continue. So I think tonight you will hear bits and pieces tying back to the strategic plan. Just very excited to uplift this plan as we probably will even extend probably to 2026. So reflecting on spring 2020 and even now into this school year, I think it's really powerful that we uplift our growth mindset. And there's things that we can glow about. Resilience. Think about our families, our students, our teachers, and how much we've learned to be resilient, to be flexible. We've had to adapt constantly, rethink decisions, come back to the table. Family engagement, and I'm thinking about a principal in her words that she's never felt more connected to families now. And beautiful stories, as I've interacted with teachers, administrators, that students are learning and they uplift the great experiences that they've had. Teacher collaboration has probably come to a higher level more than ever as we've leaned on each other. How do we make this work? How do we come together to think about instruction? What is assessment going to look like? A lot of teacher collaboration. And then I think about all the advances that we've made with technology. We are a one-to-one school district. Every teacher, every student has a piece of technology in their hands that has allowed learning to advance. And those new technology skills, although sometimes they were tough, but we did acquire and even mastered. And I think about the unification of Google Classroom and what that's done for our platform. We've utilized Seesaw. Even our professional learning has now taken place through these platforms for teachers. So much to glow about. Stacey, how about the grow?
Well, we've had lots of opportunity to grow in various ways, both for students and staff alike. As you know, we began the year in a distance learning model, and teachers had to work hard to set up a classroom community in a virtual manner. When we left in the spring, there was already a classroom community created that teachers could build upon in a virtual setting. They had to actually build that from the ground up and do that in a virtual setting. Then we moved to face-to-face with some restrictions at the elementary level, which really had to shift the way that teachers practiced with their students, whether it was morning meetings or workshops. They weren't able to come and gather together at the small carpet and be sitting right next to each other because we had to have physical distancing. There's also, you had elementary kiddos who couldn't give those hugs that they love to give because we had to be mindful of what that meant to be together. We also then had lots of cleaning that our teachers had to engage in and are doing now again when they're in face-to-face. At the same time, our secondary had to shift into a hybrid model where half of their kids were in front of them and half of their kids were at home virtually. And they were trying to balance and how to make sense. And that's what they're doing right now, of how to engage their students and to have productive conversations when half of them are right there in front of you and the other half are on a screen right next to you. And how do you do that? And so they really had to work, and they are working to honor the students in each of those settings. And they are also having to clean then in between each of those classes. So a group of kiddos leave their classroom and another group comes in, and so they need to clean in between that. And so that's a growing of how to manage all of those components. When we think about Clarkson Virtual, that was new, both with the volume of students who chose that learning platform, as well as the implementation of 2 different platforms for learning for our students to engage in. It shifted how we staff the work for that, as well as our teachers having to shift what it meant to teach from what they're used to of a face-to-face to how to engage to be a mentor while still engaging students and having a classroom community in a completely virtual way. Then we know with technology, the struggles and limitations, it's a given with technology. And when you have so many people on technology, there's a lot of hiccups that can happen. And we've experienced that in our meetings here. And We experience it even in our own meetings here at the board office and across the district, as well as our students and teachers, that things just don't work. And we've had to manage that and figure out how to problem solve and keep on moving. Our teachers have worked to create Google Classroom and Google Meets and Zoom and really work in how to use that technology in different ways in that virtual setting. We also had to think about and be very mindful of the screen time that our students were in front of a device, and be very mindful of how do we have students have some breaks, have some time to interact and to think without being in front of a screen. And so also when we think about the trauma that has taken place and is continuing to take place in our students, in our staff, in our families, we know that our social workers, our counselors, our administrators, they have really been working diligently to support students and families through the various traumas that they are experiencing, whether it's financial hardships, the illnesses and loss, isolation, as well as the civil unrest that's happening in our country. And now that we're back face to face, it gives us the opportunity to connect with their needs in real time.
Thank you, Stacy. You know what, Heidi, before we go to this slide, I'm just wondering if Board of Education, if you have any thoughts on glowing and growing, your perspective, your thinking, anything that we could add to this?
Mrs. Mahoney, hi, it's Mrs. Horst. I can't tell now who can see who on the screen because I've changed my format, but I think when you encapsulate it like this, the word I wrote down as you were talking was just monumental. And, you know, a couple of us, Mr. Need and I, as the leadership team, have been present for, you know, quite a bit of the planning that's gone on since March 12th. And I think he and I probably have a pretty good handle on the behind the scenes work that has gone into what you've managed to capture in one slide. And I don't know necessarily even that the other trustees and certainly our community really understands the volume of what's on one slide in front of them. And it really was a monumental effort, both internally and externally, because a lot of what's captured there, our families were involved in. And I just, when I sit here and reflect, I just think about a community effort, you know, that this was, this has been for almost a year now, just a tremendous collaboration and involvement, both of our staff and our community to get us this far. And, you know, as we sit here tonight and we talk about returning to full-time face-to-face, and I know that there are still some people that are anxious about that, that we really are, when you look at this and you talk about one-to-one technology and you talk about having a unified platform, you know, things that really we weren't even thinking about until this pandemic. I mean, it is forcing us now to be more nimble and more flexible and more creative in many ways. And I think that in the long run, we're going to be a much better school district because of it. And so I just continue to be grateful for the people, you know, both who work for the school district and our families, I think, who have I don't glowed and growed. I think that's probably poor grammar, but who have helped us through all of this and put us in this position today. That's what I reflect on.
Thank you very much.
I would just add that it strikes me that as you were going through this, I didn't see anything new on this slide. You know, these were all things that we were concerned with long ago, pre-pandemic, that were on our minds. I mean, certainly maybe hybrid learning and a couple of the delivery mechanisms were a little new to us and practicing them. But I mean, we were thinking about these concepts, you know, long ago in terms of, you know, how children are affected. You know, now they're affected in new ways, but what's gone on in their lives has been a concern long ago. The resiliency and family engagement and collaboration and technology. I mean, all of these things have been important to us. We're using them in ways I don't think we've ever imagined. But you know, what is important to us in terms of, you know, future goals and focus areas, that hasn't changed, you know, really at all. I think as you showed our 4 pillars and our strategic kind of plan ideas that we came up with long before the pandemic. I mean, certainly that student-centered learning that you highlighted, I mean, yes, now more than ever, exactly. It doesn't mean like that's new. it means, you know, we're still doing that, but that's important now too. And I think that shows that I think we're on the right path. I think it shows that, you know, we have some challenges, but we're equipped hopefully to overcome them as best as we can. You know, I mean, we're in uncharted territory. I think we can continue to improve. I think you have something about that on an upcoming slide, but I mean, that's where my head is at as I hear from parents. It's like, we're doing the best we can. And that means we're continuing to do better. I mean, what we're delivering now is sure a heck of a lot better than what we were delivering in April. You know, is it as good as we can get? Like, I hope not. I hope we can do better. And I think that's a lot what tonight's workshop is all about.
Mrs. Mahoney, I really appreciate this slide of the presentation, because for me, the biggest thing that I see is the resiliency and the adaptability, not just of our administration and our teaching staff, but of our community and our families. I've had a conversation with a friend who's had a 9-year-old daughter in our district, and he works at home. She's at home doing school, and she came to him a couple of days ago with a math question. And she's like, I need to know. And she's like trying to explain it. She said, you know what, forget it. I'll just go Google it. You're not going to be able to help me. I'll just figure it out myself. And when he told me this story, my heart just bloomed, because I saw our kids can be advocates for their own education. They can take control of, you know what, I have a question here. I got to figure it out. What, there might not be an adult in the room to help me. I'm going to have to go figure it out myself. I'm not so sure that opportunity would have presented itself in the normal everyday classroom environment of a face-to-face education. So I really see that both our community inside our district and our community outside the district, meaning our family and our students, have learned and grown because of the pandemic, with their resiliency and their adaptability and their ability to advocate for themselves.
Thank you. It's a great story.
I agree with everything that my colleagues have just said. The other thing that strikes me as I go through this, you know, a year ago we were on a cusp to address some of the inequities that are present in our educational system, in attempting to, you know, assist families that are economically challenged or otherwise challenged. Of course, the pandemic put a stop, unfortunately, to those efforts. Unfortunately, it strikes me that those folks are probably further behind now than they were then, and some special kinds of attention needs to be directed that way. I don't know how you measure it. I don't know if there's data out there that would allow us to measure that, but something that occurs to me as I look at this, and hopefully we will address that as well.
Yes, we are. Mr. Need, we're going to definitely address that in tonight's presentation. Anyone else? I really appreciate your thoughts and your comments and what you're thinking about and what you're hearing, because I think in every bullet point that we talked through this evening, it could be a workshop. It's hard to put the whole summation into one. We're going to do our very best. So thank you. Heidi, we can move forward.
Yes, thank you for those comments. They warm my heart. Wonderful comments. So in response to the pandemic, the Michigan Department of Education required districts to submit extended COVID learning plans with 2 K-8 educational goals for ELA and math. And I want to reassure you that even though the state only required these 2 goals, that we're pretty specific, that we are continuing to focus on early childhood through 12th grade. And you have already seen that we haven't forgotten about our strategic plan goals as well. So the goals are basically that we will show improvement in ELA or reading, depending on the grade level, and math. And we are using our STAR or iReady assessments to show this growth. Below the goals, we have some strategies, and it's exciting because our teachers are using the formative assessment process to make adjustments in their teaching and instruction and helping every student at their own pace to aim towards mastery. And they also are discussing the assessments and collaborating and working as a professional learning community. It'll be great to get more data as we are in person, because the data, we're going to look at it on the next slide, but it's a little bit more limited during the pandemic. You can switch slides now. Thank you. So at the end of last week, you were given some sample data, and we're going to take a look at some of this sample data, and I'll explain what it is that we're looking at, keeping in mind that, of course, we have a lot of other data that we're looking at. But basically, despite COVID, we were still able to collect and analyze data. However, there are various factors with some of the assessments taken by students at home, some of them taking in school. So we have that variation. So we do have some wonders with the true picture maybe of the data, and the winter window of assessment is currently happening. So we're very excited that this is being conducted in person so that we don't have those variations that we're kind of wondering about and any additional varied factors. So with this data, up top is kind of divided into three parts, and up top we're looking at our current first graders data. So on the far right upper corner, this is the fall data for our current first graders. And to the left of it is where they were in the winter before the pandemic hit as kindergartners. So it's the same cohort with that arrow in the middle. And then underneath, in the smaller donut, if you will, is a comparison for first grade students from 2019. And then in the middle box, we're looking at something very similar, only it's for third graders. So you can see the current third graders in that right upper donut and where they were in the winter as second graders, and then a comparison in the smaller donut. And this data is all reading data, and it's using running records for consistency, because right now we have some of our elementary schools using STAR and some of them using iReady. So everybody uses running records, so there we don't have that variation there. And then at the bottom, we have some secondary data. So using STAR, you can see what has happened with our students that are in 8th grade and where they were in 7th grade. And the red is math and the blue is reading. Again, keeping in mind that a lot of these students maybe took the test at home compared to some of the students took it in person. So there, we do have that. So I know that you received this last week. You maybe already took a look at it. So you can just let us know, what are your noticings? What kind of questions do you have, wonderings? Often with data, we have more questions than answers, but that's okay. We still want to hear those questions as well. So what's kind of sticking out for you guys with that?
We have a request. If you could, it's kind of a small screen. Can you tell us what that vertical axis is? Is that percent of students that are at a certain proficiency level, or what is the vertical?
With the bottom graph with the STAR data?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is going to be the national percentiles, that would be the average of our students. So it's going up by tens. So from fall to fall, for math, it went 60 percentile to 58 percentile average. And for reading, we saw 46 percentile to 48 percentile.
And that's the same cohort from 7th to 8th grade?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
So Wendy, I take it you're asking for some input from us as board members, and I would say from my perspective, I'm seeing that the data collection from our winter kindergarten to fall first graders shows a larger group of kids beginning. And I'm going to make a broad assumption again that our kindergartners to first grader have seen a greater lag than our second to third graders.
Thank you, Cheryl.
And I think that echoes a lot of what we heard as we were hearing from parents over the fall. It seems as though the parents of our younger students were the ones that were expressing the great concern about those kinds of things as the year went on. I mean, I can think of some very specific communications we received where they did feel like they were seeing regression in the home in terms of reading skills or in terms of some of these things from the previous spring. So this didn't surprise me. It saddens me, but it doesn't surprise me.
So I think one thing that we need to think about is when we see first grade data like this, and we see this large red portion, this data speaks to, we need to react to this, we need to respond to this. And so you will see in future slides here how we did respond, and the data speaks. And so we certainly want to get a handle on that. What we don't see here is, our well-being data. And this is a lot of academic focus. And so partnering with Stacy as well as we lead into data is how are kids feeling? How are they responding? And we know that, kids do better face-to-face. They do better in a social arena. And so I guess that's one exciting piece that we are returning. I think Wendy spoke to the fact that, our data was a little bit misleading here because some was taken at home while others were face-to-face. We've just started our next round of data. And I think that we have a kind of a somewhat more level playing field in January. So this data is going to again speak volumes to us as to how we need to respond. But I think as we now embrace our students, I think better than ever, we're going to get a stronger feel with their social emotional learning as well as academic. And I think we need to collaborate and tie this together. Not only in elementary, but in secondary as well.
Thank you.
So
Wendy.
I do have a question. We don't have any spring data represented because we didn't give any spring assessments due to COVID. So we can't see how our kindergartners did it on the spring running records.
That is correct.
We did exit, yes. Yep.
Okay. Being a educator, I completely understand this data and I see it every day in my classroom. So
Thank you, Ms. Catalina. Heidi, I'll let you take us back to the next slide.
Sorry, I'm working on it. Just one moment.
No problem. I can even start talking. Our next slide is really about continuous improvement. And so as we think about our collaboration with administrators and subject area coordinators, we have collaborated together. And that's important as we continue to move forward with our division meetings with administrators, our subject area coordinator. I cannot wait to come to the day when I can pull our team of subject area coordinators back together for a full day of insightfulness, of planning, of providing feedback. And I'm hoping that that will happen soon and we can move forward on that with instructional meetings. We are very excited as we have developed and adopted the professional learning plan for next year. They are full days. And I think as we continue to look at data, it is going to drive what the professional learning will look like next year. So we're taking a strong look again at the needs, at the data, and really developing a plan for next year's professional learning. Multi-tiered systems of supports have probably taken a new level, especially when we come back face to face. What does tier 1 instruction look like? It might look stronger now than our tier 2 because we're moving to tier 2 back into tier 1. And so we're really constantly looking at that data to see what does every student, the majority, need in a tier 1. And then we can start building our supports in place when it comes to small groups.
And last year, our 3 Title I elementary buildings created equity plans to address the various needs of their students. And due to COVID, we had to put parts of that plan on pause. And so now it's time for us to bring that back up to the top to re-examine and put equitable practices into place for those buildings.
And we're working on some partnerships with the Michigan Department of Education and the Michigan Assessment Consortium to continuously improve to make sure that we can have a focus on the formative assessment process and increasing the use of data to make those great instructional decisions.
So we've taken some immediate action, constantly adjusting our instruction based on feedback and the communication that we have received. And as you know, as a Board of Education, for grading adjustments at the secondary level, we made some adjustment as we winded down our first semester within this pandemic. Student grades for semester 1 that were below a 50% were brought up to become a 50%. There were no traditional or comprehensive final exams. Final exam week was used to really support students with missing assignments, missing projects, and work with teachers. And then completing semester 1, students will have the opportunity to view their grades to indicate if they wish to change class grades to pass, instead of a letter grade on their transcript. Now this is only if they received a 60% or higher. This does affect GPA, but at least students had that opportunity to make that decision as a family in terms of moving forward.
Another immediate action that we took is because of increased flexibility from the Michigan Department of Education with the student growth portion of teacher evaluations, we were able to make some changes for this year. And we have a district-wide data set that we are using for all teachers. We're all in this together. And what this does is it gives all teachers an effective rating for the student growth portion of their evaluation. If teachers want to, they can still provide their own data. Also, it really sets that message that we want teachers to focus on their own data that's meaningful for them and focus on that formative process that's really going to help with driving instructional decisions.
So responding to data, this is going back to the kindergarten first grade data that we just reviewed. And this is an immediate action that we took in response to that data. Was so much of the letter identification, letter sound, phonemic skills, the high frequency words. Those would have been small group that we would have pulled kids to address those needs. But based on the data, this is large group instruction. And so our first grade teachers are really leading this work in a tier 1 all group instructional decision. We also had kids on a watch list for the reading growth plan because our data was back in the winter. We just kept those reading growth plans as is. And now that we are back face to face, we can reassess and maybe take some kids off reading growth plans, but adding others on. So we can be more responsive. I think we're stronger. We're more aware of the needs of kids and their reading at this time as we continue to push forward with assessment and formative assessment to really, I think, tune in on our reading growth plans up through 3rd grade.
We've also put well-being supports into place. The first thing with going one-to-one, we put in Go Guardian, and there are 2 parts of that, Go Guardian Beacon and Go Guardian Teacher. The Go Guardian Beacon allows us to get notifications and alerts related to any student search or work that signals active planning for suicide, suicide ideation, or self-harm. Principals are also able to gauge the sites that students are searching and are addressing issues that arise. One thing that we changed based on what we were seeing was access to YouTube. It is now shut off for all students between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. And we know that when administrators have had the opportunity to reach out to parents regarding any of the concerns that have come up with either the Go Guardian Beacon or Teacher, that they have been thankful that we do have our eyes on their students in these various ways. Go Guardian Teacher allows our teachers to limit the sites that students use and to better set up a virtual learning environment for their students. This is something that we're continuing to grow into and will provide more professional learning for our teachers with that. We also then have had Wellness Wednesdays, and this has allowed the time for individual and small group supports with students. It has also given time for students to work on projects and perhaps get any assistance from their teachers that they might need in the middle of that week. The later starts that we've had with the distance learning has given all students the opportunity to sleep in more and that they need to function. Our secondary teachers have noted that their students are more alert because they are getting up later. And it's really because their sleep schedules are now more in line, or when they're in distance learning, are more in line with their biological sleep cycle. And the hour of lunch for all students and teachers really gave a much needed break for all. In fact, we encouraged and witnessed staff who had the time to take a walk during this time. And so what an opportunity to breathe and likely even problem solve different things as they were walking together. The common lunch times gave the opportunity also for families to eat another meal together. Then the time between classes of 10 minutes was allowing students to have a pause to process the class that they just left and to set themselves up for the next class, whether it's virtually or in person. While it's a lot for our teachers, especially the secondary, to clean in between each of the classes, a benefit was that it's forced our students to keep walking because we didn't want students to be congregating. And so they actually got some needed movement every hour, and that's what they're getting when they're in face-to-face. And so they get some movement that they're walking around the buildings. And so truly my hope is that when we move beyond the pandemic, that we will continue to use and implement some of these well-being practices.
Now we wanted to just highlight some focus areas that we are really targeting. So Wendy, I'll let you take that first bullet.
Yes, so we have a secondary database decision-making group collaboration, and we have representatives from all of the secondary buildings. And what's really great about it is that we have various positions. So we have deans and we have counselors and we have teachers and interventionists that have come together. And the group actually started a couple years ago with a partnership with Oakland schools for some professional learning and a foundation of common understanding and creating of goals. And now I'm taking this over, and the group has met 2 times already briefly because it's difficult with distance learning, but hopefully we'll get in a position where we can meet in person and for a little bit longer amount of time. Our focus is really on the structure and data analysis to improve instruction with this continuous improvement model. We also have a book study that we're doing that is focusing on facilitating teams and professional learning communities with a lens of using data.
Excellent, thank you. So this is probably the biggest one I'm excited about is this next bullet, and that is math coaches at North Sashaba Elementary. Mr. Need, I think you brought this to the attention when we were reflecting on areas of glow and grow. And so we think about the data that we even had at North Sash prior to the pandemic and the needs that really came to the top at this school, and then knowing how our students embraced the pandemic. This was a very strong need that we reacted to, and I'm very excited. We recently hired 2 math coaches at North Sashaba Elementary, one for lower L and one for upper L. They will be leading the work of the curriculum around Bridges United with the implementation of an intervention program called Math Recovery. Staff and our new coaches, as well as our principal, Jen Johnson, will be embracing Math Recovery. And I do believe it's going to make a difference in the lives of kids when it comes to mathematics as we are back face to face. So super excited about this bullet. After school programming is something that we are taking action on right now. We're thinking about a virtual setting where teachers will be paid after school to have small groups when it focused around literacy. And so we are definitely in the action plan right now for this. We are also in the action plan of summer programming and what that looks like at the elementary level. We're putting a survey out to our community right now just to see what their interests are, what's doable for them, thinking about in-person versus virtual, how this might look in the summer, but could we do an experiential experience for our kids where they may take a field trip? We want direct instruction focused around a science theme where we're building in math and literacy as well. So super excited about the opportunity to have some summer learning for our kids. National Writing Project for ELA and Social Studies. This is a secondary focus. I'm partnering with Laura Mahler and Brian Pierce as we look at possibly what's called the C3P movement, College, Career, and Community Ready, which focuses on writing, communication, and discourse for the change in our 21st century. This professional learning comes from the National Writing Project, focuses around reading, writing, argument, and communication. I'm very excited about the possibilities that can emerge from there. Also, the LEO project at Oakland Schools, this bullet alone could be a workshop for our Board of Education, but every district in Oakland County is partnering with LEO. This is Literacy Essential of Oakland, and we have formed a literacy leadership team here in Clarkson that is made up of our coordinators, our coaches, administrators, teachers, including special education and myself. And Clarkson has kind of adopted this goal or program that we really want to connect with our community in terms of a partnership to not only grow literacy, but sustain literacy and partnering with our families. So more to come in that. Super excited about all the professional learning there that we are receiving from Oakland Schools. The Reading Apprentices training, this is targeted for secondary as well. And this is a partnership of professional learning that really comes out of Wayne Risa, where our secondary buildings are formulating teams, reading across the content area. So these are cross-content teams coming together to learn more about reading, again, to really focus in on improving reading skills in our with our secondary students. School start times, I think Stacy really elevated this and what we've experienced in the pandemic and what have we learned and what can we bring as we move forward. But thinking about school start times and what we could think about in the future and maybe move some times around for the betterment of our students. Starting school sooner in August. Had conversation with Dr. Ryan. Is this possible to move school to start earlier in August? We would like to pursue this, get kids in the classroom in front of our teachers. We believe that learning, happens best this way. And can we make this movement? As well as focusing in on class sizes. We know this is vital and it makes a huge difference with students and their learning, with teachers, and in the relationships and the learning. So again, we really want to make this a targeted focus as we look at next year with maintaining low class sizes, not only in elementary, but how important that is in secondary as well. And before we go to our last slide, I just again want to reflect, we've had continuous improvement. We've talked about some immediate actions that were taking place, these areas of targeted focus. Is there any comments from you, Board of Education? Is there anything that we're missing? Your thoughts?
Well, I like to think that really nothing's off the table at this point. I mean, we've certainly heard the conversation nationally and here in our own community about the concerns, you know, that our students are behind. I mean, that's the narrative, right? And obviously we're trying to measure that right now. And I think we will have a really good handle on it by the end of the school year when we get a couple of more rounds of that data in terms of exactly where our students stand in Clarkston and what we need to do. And so when I look at some of these ideas, in my mind, nothing should be off the table. And our, you know, when we've heard from parents and they've been telling us that they're concerned about it, they should say that too. So I think we'll see how serious everybody is about that when we start talking about some of these ideas about starting school sooner in August. And so I don't know if you mean for this fall or if you mean indefinitely or moving around school start times. I mean, when some of these things might sound interesting, but we'll see when the rubber hits the road if people really are going to be serious about it. So the class size one is interesting to me too, because I think for us it's a really big unknown, knowing that we had hundreds, bordering on a couple of thousand students move to a virtual academy this year out of concern over the pandemic and what's going to happen in the fall. None of us know. Are they going to want to move back, you know, to the residential program, I'll call it? Or are they going to want to stay in this, you know, in this different format that maybe they've fallen in love with and feel serves their family best? So that's really a big unknown. And so what will that require of us in terms of staffing to maintain some of these lower class sizes that I think, you know, people will really enjoy this spring in some of these buildings. So I think there's a lot here that's going to require some will on some people's parts, but I think they're all incredibly creative ideas. And I think that's one of the things that came out of this whole pandemic is that, you know, we've learned how to do business differently. And I am absolutely behind doing what's going to work best for students and families. And so, so whatever's going to work best and work for our families, I'm absolutely willing to try.
And President Horst, and I just would like to add, and even on it, when you look at this list of ideas, this isn't something that you immediately go out and publish that what Clarkston is doing. This is what we're looking at as really everything in the kitchen sink to drive things forward. And it's going to be done with the cooperation of our administrators, our board, our CEA. You know, a lot of these things involve our school year and things that we're going to work very collaboratively with our teachers and Mr. Bialis and company to really see where we can hit the road. You know, it's not going to be unilateral. It's going to be a collective effort together moving forward. So I just want to make sure that this isn't some sort of pocket list. This is really us brainstorming to look at, you know, what can we bring to bear? And there's going to have to be a lot of people around the table as we go into the spring and summer to really vet that out and make sure it works for everybody, especially and foremost our kids.
Dr. Ryan, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I will echo and double down on the fact that what Mrs. Horst said, historically, I mean, we haven't done some things we know are good for school because our community says we're not ready for that, right? That might be start times or radically different calendar and some of those things. And obviously we're all elected to represent our community and represent our parents and demand, you know, that we are doing everything we could possibly do. We're given a finite number of resources that sometimes doesn't seem like enough, most times doesn't seem like enough. And we eke out as much as we possibly can. And that's our job as a board. And I think, you know, all of the things that were on that first slide that we started with, that have sort of flipped upside down our traditional thinking of what education looks like, with hybrid and face-to-face and distance and virtual and one-to-one. I mean, we have a real opportunity now, I think, that nobody knows what normal is right now, right? Certainly in my house, like we haven't gotten in a groove, you know, longer than a couple weeks, and it feels like we're doing something different. And I'm sure that's the way everybody in our school community is feeling right now. And I think let's leverage that. Let's take that out for a spin, and not in any way that is going to harm kids. I don't want to try something. I'm not looking to experiment. I'm not looking for a fad. But I mean, there are definitely some things that you have up here that we've been talking about for years and years and years. And you know, let's see what might work for Clarkston. And I think again, it's a teacher, parent, student, administrator, board collaborative. It's not a unilateral decision of, you know, this is what we're going to do. So I really like that. I will switch gears slightly and say, as I saw the slides and I knew this workshop was coming up, and none of us are really too excited to be workshopping on Zoom, but that's what we have. I'm glad we did it. I was really impressed with what I saw, and I knew those were the conversations. And, you know, we've been having these conversations, and we've been corresponding with parents via email and talking to some parents, and you know, the grocery store conversations are all phone calls and emails now, it seems like, because I haven't spent a lot of time anywhere lately. And in that, I know we were moving this direction. To see it kind of concisely put together, I applaud and appreciate the effort. And I was very impressed, having known everything that we're doing. And I'll say, as a board, it is our job to represent our community. And what we do is allocate resources, and we hire a superintendent, and the superintendent hires a staff. And it's our job to make sure this all happens. That we didn't demand this to happen. We didn't ask for this to happen. We put policies in place, we put budgets in place, and we've been working toward this moment that we didn't know was going to exist for years and years and years. Long time for me, many years for some of our colleagues here. You know, I mean, Dr. Ryan, you've been in Clarkston 20 some years. I feel like we've been moving in this direction for quite some time, ready for the moment that we never knew was coming, that we hoped didn't come, that I still hope we never realized. And that was to adapt and completely reinvent our program. And I mean, when you talk in one of the early slides, you said we completely reinvented our program in a short amount of time when you were making your introductory remarks. I mean, that we reinvented the whole damn program. I mean, completely from the top down, bottom up. This is a new thing that we're doing. And I'm impressed that we've been able to do that, and we put all those foundational pieces in place. What I would say as a board is we would be remiss on behalf of our community if we didn't demand more. And I'm not demanding more in a way to say this isn't good enough, but I'm demanding more in a way that, like, I think we need to continuously improve. And so I guess I would challenge you, and I don't put you on the spot now because and this is more of a truly a collaborative, longer term kind of thing. But what more can we do? Like if we had more resources, if we had more time, if we had more effort, you know, this isn't going away. This style of, whether it's a pandemic or either, you know, equity concerns that we have in the future, like, we are going to have to be damn creative to meet the needs of our students and our families and our community. And I think, like I said, we were moving that direction. Mr. Need really emphasized what I've been talking about. We've all been talking about. Unfortunately, the folks that have been most challenged in this are the ones that tend to be most challenged anyway. And that's painful. And I think we need to continue to do more there, because while we, you know, it's great when you aggregate data, but there are still some outliers in there that we need to focus on. I know we are when we look at, when we drill down, and we're just doing an overview tonight. But I guess my challenges and my question to, you know, kind of lead us into maybe the next few meetings and workshops is, what more can we do? What does that look like? What do we need what do we as a board need to advocate for? What do we as a board need to push for? What does that look like and how we go forward? Because I think, you know, until every student is achieving their dreams at every corner, like, there's more to do. And so I think we're on the same page there. And that's my question / challenge of, you know, what more is there?
Mrs. Horst, if I may, just a couple thoughts. I echo Mr. Heyer's thoughts in terms of, you know, this is not really going to go away. What we're already seeing, I have adult children now in their 20s and 30s who are experiencing probably what will be some permanent changes in the employment world. I think the good side that we saw at the beginning of this presentation is that our kids actually are growing and learning and experiencing pretty similar changes that the adults have had to experience. We've all had to dig in and really embrace a lot more technology, a lot of frustrating moments where we can't connect with people. But we're learning and we're doing it and we're getting through it, and that's great. In terms of what more can we do, I would say even looking at our learning spaces, companies, for instance, are realizing hybrid may be the way that they're going to reduce their real estate cost, their office space cost. And so maybe we need to look at, just the bricks and mortars that we have and look at the learning space that we have too. I look at school start times and starting school sooner in August. There were years ago when we talked about maybe considering the balanced calendar, but of course we didn't think our community was ready. So I really think it's a good time to open up a lot of different ideas, not only just the board driving this, but certainly listening to our community and see how they feel. Some people are not going to like giving up summer. It's kind of like when we close the school and then when we open it, we cannot make everybody happy. But I do think we can start to look at some things, and I am extremely appreciative of the fact that we are, we're not kind of brushing the underperformance and the lost learning under the rug. We're really addressing it head on. We want to bring all our students up to a higher level. There are times I feel discouraged for our kids, and I feel badly for the parents who, particularly a lot of the moms out there, are now unemployed because they've had to stay home with their kids. So in the summer, a lot of parents struggle with where do they put their kids. And I think certainly we can be doing some things this summer, but I hope that we'll look even further out and maybe embrace our community and get some ideas from our community as well as our staff and the board. So those are my thoughts.
Mrs. Egan, while you were talking, I think a lot of us would agree with the fact that like every family is affected somehow, and some disproportionately negatively than others. And I wonder, I guess I'll ask Dr. Ryan, as we go forward, is there any way to get a read on that? I mean, obviously I have my circles and I know what, my friends and, family and, maybe another layer out, some of my clients and people, but, I don't see a lot of people. It's not like I have a gathering where you talk to people. I wonder what the effect has been. I mean, I hate to talk in sort of emotion or assumptions or platitudes because, we want to make educational decisions based on data. And I don't know in terms of resource allocation. I mean, how bad is it, for our families? I mean, we don't hear that from our families of, we hear about families having challenges meeting distance learning. I mean, certainly we've heard that. We're now hearing about families who are going to have challenges, with face-to-face, and I get that, but that's such a small number, and I don't know, like, what is the unemployment situation? What are the financial hardships? A lot of those trauma kinds of things that you mentioned. I don't know how many of our families are affected by that. My feel is a good number of them, but I don't know that, and that would be helpful, I think, to understand more in terms of how much of that do we have to focus on. So as you're talking, Mrs. Egan, I wondered, kind of out loud, I've got a sense of that, but like I don't know how pervasive it really is, because unfortunately I'm not seeing people, and I'm not, we're not able to be in the buildings, and I'm not volunteering in my kids' classroom to hear from their peers and what's going on. Like it's just different now.
I wholeheartedly agree. In fact, I really think that, again, it shouldn't be within our bubble, like our board administrative kind of Clarkston Community Schools bubble. I mean, I know, you know, we're having more interface with the kids. And of course, parents, it's through email. But I really do think we do need to somehow get more community information and find out what's going on. And that should help us drive what change, you know, what change can we continue to embrace? There are going to be some good things that come out of this. And sometimes it's hard to see it when you're in the midst of all the, you know, the smoke. But I do think our families and our community will help us identify some of the bigger things that we can be looking at. So I'm not sure how you want to pursue that, but as Mr. Heyer said, I wholeheartedly believe we have to go out into our community and get that information.
I like the way you're thinking there. There's definitely negatives, but let's figure out what the positives are and make sure we grab onto those, because there's no way to get rid of the negatives. We can try to mitigate them, but let's make sure we grasp onto the positives going forward. We can't lose sight of that. That's a great point.
You know, one last thing I want to say, I'm just, because in my dialogue with my professional adult children, they're embracing the hybrid model because they are way more productive. They are not commuting into school, or not into school, but into, you know, their jobs, and they've learned to collaborate. I mean, so, you know, we are much more nimble than we think we are, but that's kind of where I was going, is that there are going to be some great positives that come out of this. It might be hard to see them right now, but I think we can find them and we can grow them. And that might help us, you know, move forward. I've heard it said that what forces change is that the change of remaining the same is more painful than the change of moving forward. And I do think if we can find those positives, we can pull ourselves out of this. And even to Mrs. Horst's point earlier, you know, let's do what works for the, you know, the families and these kids. So that's where I'm going.
Such good feedback, good thoughts. Thank you very much, board. So we have one final slide, Stacy. Let's bring it home here.
All right. So we know learning matters. And now that we are back face to face, it's important to move together at a healthy pace and meet students' individuals' needs along the way. This is our opportunity to greet students where they are and not where we think they should be, as well as to nurture the resilience and to help them adjust to a post-pandemic world. And this is done when we are truly focused in on these 4 questions and put them into practice so that our students, our families, our staff feel seen, heard, protected, and treated fairly. And so I think about even this last part of our conversation with Ms. Egan and Mr. Heyer of what our community needs are and how do we know? And for us to truly reach out to them, that helps us and helps them to know that they are seen and heard and that we will protect them and that we will treat them fairly. And what does that mean? So lots of work to do, but we are so thankful for this time to share it with you and to gather the feedback from you. And so thank you so very much.
And again, just a beautiful celebration that we're back together, that teachers are in the proximity of their students, and it's a beautiful place. And our hope is that we can continue to move forward, just to bring kids together and to learn and to grow together. Your feedback is very important, and I hope that we can come back to share more thinking and learning together as we move forward, just to build strength within our community and to grow our students.
As we're in the sort of the period of this plan where I feel like since we don't see each other, it's much easier for misinformation to spread. And as we've shared kind of big ideas here that are just that at this point, they're things we're investigating. They're not done deals. They're not hardcore plans. They're ideas we're exploring and looking at. And I think it's really important for the community to understand, and us as a school community to communicate in such a way that if it's not in one of Dr. Ryan's weekly emails, like it's not a thing. please don't trust something that you see on Facebook or you get a text message. If it doesn't quite sound right, I mean, I've heard some interesting things just in the limited digital communication that I've had. And it's like, why would we do some of that to kids? Like, clearly that would hurt kids. Why would we do that? Why would we cut somebody off from a certain support or not provide them, encouragement in a certain modality? Like if it doesn't sound right, it probably isn't. And I think sometimes somebody's emotional reaction is such that they tell 10 more people before they even think about it. And, misinformation gets out there. And I think we're at the cusp of potentially having some of that take hold. So, as we transition, and completely into face-to-face, we still have some students virtual. Every family situation is different. And I know our administration has done a hell of a job on an individual basis, finding the right program and the right path for kids. And I know we're going to continue to do that. But let's make sure as we communicate that we're clear on that. I think this was a great chance for the board to kind of weigh in and dialogue a little bit. Thank you, Mrs. Horst and Mr. Need for, representing the board from a leadership standpoint as we've gone. And while this is lousy over Zoom, it's certainly better than not having the conversation. And there are plenty of districts out there. I mean, I deal with school boards all over the state in my MASB role. And there are plenty of districts that are not exactly on the same page with their administration. That causes a whole host of other problems. So I think, the relationship that we have and being able to be open and honest and suggest things. And, it's not like Dr. Ryan says something we just all agree. I mean, he makes suggestions and we find what's going to work for us here. And we investigate it a little more and we correct a little more. And, I think these have largely been obvious database decisions that we're making as of late. While still difficult, I think it's important to note, working together is really a way to do that. And I think a dialogue like this really helps us stay on the same page. I appreciate the chance to be heard, and I appreciate the chance to hear from you, and hope our community appreciates the deliberation that we have together. And as always, we'll hear more from the community probably tonight, but it's always great hearing different perspectives and keeping that two-way dialogue going.
All right, thank you, everyone. Obviously, this is a very different format for this kind of presentation and discussion. Normally, we would be in our small conference room behind where our meetings are held, and it would be more informal and more conversational, but this was a topic I think that we needed to move forward with now that we have transitioned back to face-to-face instruction. And so very interesting that our community got a chance to sort of look behind the curtain at something that we do a handful of times a year in terms of education really for us as a board. These are the kinds of topics that we sit down with administration on and do a deeper dive on something that we want to learn more about, and have dialogue with and give feedback to on these kinds of ideas. And so for those of you in attendance tonight that have stayed and listened, you've gotten to see things that we typically do a half dozen or more times a year with our administration on topics that we get pretty deep with them on. So I'm appreciative that so many of you stayed and watched and listened and got to see that. But Mr. Heyer is right. Everything that was discussed tonight were ideas that were floated. Many things we'll follow up on. If it's something that we do want to investigate, there obviously would be more conversation. Parents would be involved. Staff and teachers would be involved. There would be additional feedback there. Anything that was floated tonight were just that initial ideas and thoughts. Although I think there were a lot of things in there that we do want to follow up on, and certainly in terms of data and student performance and achievement and growth and where those go, I know that's something that we do want to continue to watch throughout the spring and probably continue to get reports on and follow as the spring semester progresses. So I would certainly call out to the board for any final thoughts. And then do we want to take just a 2 or 3 minute break to go fill up water? Stretch legs before we get into the business portion of our meeting? Take a thumbs up. Any final thoughts from trustees for the administration? All right, why don't I call a 3 minute recess? If you want to turn your cameras and microphones off, we'll come together in 3 minutes and we will get on with our business. Thank you. We are in recess. Everybody ready? Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. Item number 2 is the consent agenda. May I have a motion, please?
I move the Board of Education approves the consent agenda as presented.
Support.
We get us, hi, Ms. McLean, did you get a support on that?
Yeah,
Okay.
from Mrs.
Are there
Craig.
any questions or discussion on the consent agenda from the board? Seeing none, Mrs. McLean, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Need,
Yes.
Mrs. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mrs. Crane,
Yes.
Mrs. Egan,
Yes.
Mr. Heyer,
Yes.
Ms. Catalina,
Yes.
Mrs. Horst.
Yes, the motion carries. Item 3 is citizens' request to address the board. Under item 3, you're given 2 opportunities to address the board. Under 3.1, you can request to address the board on any topic that's on tonight's agenda. And under item 9, you are welcome to address the board on any topic. When making comments, please state your name and then direct your comments to Mrs. Kelly Horst, President, Clarkston Board of Education. Thank you. Mrs. McLean has posted tonight's agenda for you to see. So citizens, I'll give you just a moment to review the agenda tonight. If you would like to address the board on any topic that's on the agenda, now is the time to indicate your interest in doing so. You can see we have a handful of, well, obviously Dr. Ryan will give us his superintendent update and COVID summary. We have a handful of action items, personnel changes, the approval of our extended COVID-19 learning plan, which we are required to approve monthly, approval of our paraeducator contract, and we will hear our monthly finance report from Mrs. Rogers. And then, of course, at item 9, you are welcome to address the board on any topic. And then reminder, I guess there are now 2 ways to indicate your interest. For those of you with the newer version of Zoom, the raise hand feature is now on the bottom of your screen. Apparently, if you were like me, you still have to click on the participants button and then click on the raise hand feature. No, then click on attendees and then the raise hand feature. So at this time, I am not seeing anyone who wishes to address the board on any topic that's on tonight's agenda. Mrs. McLean, just verifying I have that right. Okay, we'll move on with tonight's agenda. If you wish to change your mind, there will obviously be time at item 9. So we'll move on to item 4, superintendent update. Dr. Ryan.
You're still muted.
Every time I think I click on that and it doesn't click over. As I was saying, President Horace, I appreciate the opportunity, as it's strange to think now it's going on a year of providing our community, our staff, and our students updates on where we've been going with respect to COVID along the way, both instructionally, both in wellness, both in our programming overhaul, and the pathway of the virus. And it's been a crazy story as I've looked back and have journaled myself from day one to capture the story of the twists and turns that has been COVID. And we're at a pivotal point as we move here into the end of January. And I think that I've done my best in writing to communicate. And when it comes to COVID, as many of you know, I have no delegation of duties when it comes to guiding our school district down our path. And from day one, I've done my best to immerse myself and literally become a student of pandemics, of its effects on schools, and looking at the best course forward. And our story through the twists and turns, you think back to last August, that I came before you as a board and a community with the challenges of looking at how we re-enter with our goal of being face-to-face. And as many of you recall that night, and I can't remember the one I didn't put in my notes, was it a 5 or 6 hour plus board meeting that night? But I had to come to our community and our board and with direct honesty, tell everyone that based on the information I had working within the return to school plan, that I was not satisfied, that I had the right information within the responsibilities that the board had given me to provide that recommendation, to really look at in-person learning as being a viable option at that time. And the why behind that, if we all recall, was the idea that we did not have a working cooperative relationship with our health department. I was not getting guidance except the guidance I went out and beat the street to get myself. That was not good enough. And I was also looking at data in terms of its impact on schools and learning and what it looked like during COVID to have large numbers of students and staff in buildings. And at that time, there was very little to no information that we had on it. And I believe, close paraphrasing myself, would have been not willing to experiment in Clarkston. And I went along the pathway that in some cases was not popular, or along the ideas of safety and the overall welfare of our staff and students. And I also challenged my team, myself, that as we went forward, we would completely engross ourselves in everything COVID as it related to the school district. And we did that from the get-go. Although it was very difficult, we started in that distance format. Our staff adapted marvelously based on the comparative, what we had to go on back in March. And I am so proud of the entire team. And I 100%, based on what I knew at the time back in August, support the decision and path that we went on, because this is an important story. Because as we went into September, mid-September, of looking at what was working, we were getting preliminary ideas of the protocols that needed to be infected, and also looking at, what the relative path of the virus was and the impact. There were still questions, but we had a little bit more insights, enough to look to come back in that hybrid model back in the fall, looking at October, bringing our elementary, then our secondary back in. And I stand behind those decisions. We had a guarded, measured response. We brought our students in. We had no way of knowing that we were going to literally start, although we, relatively speaking, looking at low activity in our community at the start, that we were right on the cusp of a second resurgence in Michigan. And that we were right on, as we entered in, the virus was on a clear exponential growth curve. And we experienced that. And we learned a tremendous amount of what protocols we had, how effective they were, and how we could do the number one job, which was keeping COVID out of our schools. And we fought that fight all the way to where the rates in the community made it to where our protocols began to start to not satisfy in terms of our ability to keep it out of our schools, and also the disruption factor of quarantining students that were exposed outside of school. We learned a tremendous amount from that experience. And I totally stand by when I came in front of you and our community back at the beginning of November. And before even that, on a Friday night, I had to evaluate based on the week that was and shutting down schools and everything else that we experienced, that action needed to be happened. We made the recommendation to go back into distance learning, and we did it as the virus rates were still on an increasing level. And again, we did that based on the information that we had. And we learned a tremendous amount from the experience, not only in Clarkston, but across Oakland County, Michigan, and from schools across the United States. Now, fast forward into January of looking at following the activity of COVID, noting that as a whole, the general trajectory of the virus is on a very big receding line right now. And looking back at what that actually means in terms of its impacts of the schools, it's no longer like it was way back in August. Now we're a fully functioning team with our health department. Now we have data to suggest, based on community rates, what the impact of schools are, what levels actually start to creep in, and where it becomes different on basic protocols to keep out, and what that looks like. And this has been repeated on the scale of millions of students across the United States. And as you heard our governor, schools are not the problem when it comes to transmitting COVID. That doesn't mean that it's a blind moving forward proposition. It means that with properly utilized protocols, that you can keep COVID out of your schools, and in a way that you can manage and keep your programs going. And now we're on the cusp of looking at what those rates look like in terms of our current hybrid, and that cusp of moving on to full person learning. And what we know now in January 2021 is that mask wearing is extremely effective, that it prevents between very, very limited chance of transmission. Again, in an environment where COVID has low activity within your community, because if it has high activity or on the rise, it's a completely different ball game in terms of what you do in protocols to mitigate the effects within your schools. We know the hand washing and cleaning protocols that we've become great at in Clarkston, and has been evaluated by the health department on a 99% out of 100 scale of being solid, work. We know that when it comes to social distancing, that it is within the composition of everything else, part of the game, but it's not to be relied on completely. And that really mask wearing has an incredible mitigating effect if used in mass with the other mitigation efforts. And that although as part of our plan, as we look to transition to our full face-to-face, we'll do our best. Truth be told, when you look at our secondary buildings, we have classrooms that will have challenges at maintaining that full social distancing. But what we found in schools across the country, across this county, is that our number one mitigation effort between mask wearing puts a leverage to where we can function without having COVID moving within our schools. That has been reproduced. We've studied that. We worked together in collaboration with our health department, knowing that a combination of all those efforts based on low activity in your community work. And that's the pathway that we're looking at moving forward. And it should be known that when we talk about social distancing, without masks, because we know that students eat lunch, obviously, at school within our planning, there is a no nonsense negotiation at all when it comes to keeping that 6 feet apart when those masks come off. We know that, again, from data from across this country and working with the health department, that you cannot have periods where students can lackadaisically not have masks on and be able to rotate around. And we know that, and our administrative team at the building level has looked forward to making sure that that's available. And again, these are the things that work. We are armed with knowledge. I know everybody feels like they've had an opportunity to pass judgment or look at exact CDC as it equates to school, but we become complete students in it. And I think that we are ready to turn the corner right now based on the activity of that virus. Our governor has echoed that intention and looking at what's going on in Michigan to get students back in school. We feel like right now, based on all these protocols, I have 100% confidence that if this week continues on as the last 5+ weeks have of continued decreased activity of COVID in our community, that we're poised and ready to take the next step. But it's not blindly. And I, at a loss, when I look across the table and I see school districts that from day one have been in heck or high water. It's just, we're in. I don't understand that. And I also don't understand schools that have taken the position that we're never coming back, or it's going to be at the end of this year, or when they're waiting for some magical opening in the skies. We don't know how long this period right now of remission that's occurring in our part of Oakland County and Clarkston is going to last. I wish I could tell you with a crystal ball to say it's going to last the rest of the year and that it's going to coincide with vaccines and everything else to make it sure that we can just look back in a rearview mirror. I can't tell you that. But what I can tell you right now is that we have a window, and I do not want to waste that window. And that if that window closes, I'm going to be standing there at that window at the door to shut it behind me if that requires action on behalf of this school district. We're not going to idly sit by. We constantly monitor this day in and day out. And I understand for many who look at things like, vaccine, I've had questions from our community and from our staff. Why can't we just wait until everybody's vaccinated? And I tell you that in working with the health department, we don't know when that's going to be. And that could be in weeks or months or part of till summer ahead. And the plain truth about it is, even if we had everyone vaccinated within, whether our staff, you look at it that way, if rates go up, there is still not an argument that we can safely be in school. It's the activity of the virus and our quarantining efforts and everything that we're doing will keep people safe and the virus out of our school. Obviously, we want to have everybody vaccinated. Obviously, when we have a critical mass of vaccinations across this country, whether it takes months or a year, that will mark the end of this pandemic. But till that happens, we have the potential not only later this spring or next fall, there could be other resurgence. And we have to be in the ready and be vigilant and be ready to go whenever that occurs. And it's got to be a function that we continue working in a collaborative effort. And it's my hope that what I hear from our state and larger is that we will get a more collective applied metric for all schools, and that we start moving away from individuals like myself being unilaterally working with school boards and administrations and as a team to make these decisions. But until that comes, I'm going to be doing everything I can to stay in front and make sure that I have the right information at the right time. And this is extremely personal to me. And as our board knows, I have 2 daughters that are still in Clarkston schools, one at Sashbaugh Middle School and one in Clarkston Junior High. They are the most important thing, along with my other children, to me in this world. And I believe, along with the ideas, that I would never put them or any other people's children in a way that I thought I was being reckless with their safety. And I'm going to stand by that, because, as we look forward, we're going to stick with what's working in schools and what's being reproducible. I don't know anybody that's put in the hundreds and hundreds of hours that I put in with our health department to study this in case studies and comparisons. This is like laser-like focus, but it's not static. It's not terminal in a way that we can just make a decision or make a lunge towards having all of our students back and then forget about it. Far from that. There's a lot of things that we still have to be concerned with, not only as we continue to monitor this week, but moving forward that I'll keep our board, our community, and our staff appraised of. If rates start to go up, if rates start to climb again like they did before, if there's a third resurgence, which if it's because we've lost some level of herd immunity in North Oakland County because now we've finally gone through a whole year cycle and people are becoming infected again, that could happen. We don't know. But if rates rise and we see that starting to spike, we are not going to wait to the point that we're mass closing schools like we did back in the fall. We have an eye on what's going to happen next when it comes to being able to manage this. And if we have to go back to a hybrid, although in working with our staff, I know that's not ideal. I know that's not a place that they will be. But if that's where the rates are with this virus, that's where we're going to be because that's what we need to do in response to things. Also, as many of you know that there's different variants of COVID now. South African and one from the United Kingdom that, is in different stages of potentially becoming more prevalent worldwide. We have to keep an eye on it. Do we have exact solid predictions that that's going to upset our apple cart and completely push us in a different direction next week or in 2 or 3 months from now? Absolutely not. But we have to be vigilant. And when it makes an effect, and if it increases rates or has impact on our schools or our quarantining to the point of our continuity of our program, we will react to that. We're not going to wait. We know what it looks like when we have a certain level within our community. We know how closely our schools are tied to our community. Again, schools have never been the problem, in my estimation, that have done their due diligence at being spreaders of COVID. Yes, we live in a community and we are part of it and we have our part to play, but we also have a part and responsibility when we can to get our kids back into school and to move things forward. And we also have to look at our ability to stay open long-term in effects that we might not even fully ascertain right now. I've been surprised many times. And people have given me examples. Well, you know what, Dr. Ryan, restaurants are going to be open in a couple of weeks. The game's going to be up. That's going to be it. Very premature to make generalizations to say that any effect or part of this on the greater society is then going to immediately have those impacts that are going to cause us to shut school. I've been accused, and I'm definitely guilty of being an eternal optimist, but I'm a realist too. And I can read data and I can stay ahead of things and make sure that if the activity matches the models that we have that we need to not be in school, although people may feel like, this is not the right time yet, or they have reservations and concerns, I totally acknowledge those. But I'm not going to sit by on data where I know that, by a vast majority that it's work that we sit on the sidelines. And by the same token, for those individuals and families out there who have pushed the other way, feeling like we should have been in school the entire time and we need to stay no matter what, I push back on that notion as well. I feel like that we really have to have a thoughtful and a pragmatic process to continue down the road on this. And right now, I wouldn't have exactly been able to plot it in a chart, but I can tell you following these trends through December and January and looking at virus activity again, dropping again this week, I'm extremely hopeful that we'll be able to continue on in this modality. And while the skies are open and blue and we can take advantage of it, we're going to, in my mind, and my estimation and recommendation is that we take advantage of it and we continue to move forward. And we hope that things like the advent and continued distribution of things like our vaccine continue to improve, and that, overall the outlook of this pandemic continues to go in a more positive direction for everyone. It's been a long road, and although the long road is still in front of us, I don't look at it, and hopefully our staff and our students and our families that hear my voice tonight know that I have an absolute resolve to see this through. And that I'm going to continue to have that vigilance to keep that standard. Is I do not want to see COVID transferring in our schools. And if it does, that our community and our staff trust that me, within my long history here at Clarkston, will continue to react to it. And we will make sure that we're on our toes and not on our heels. And that's my commitment to you as our Board of Education, to our staff, to my own children, to everybody in our community's children, and to our families. We know that we can move forward. We know based on experiences what is best for our kids, and we have the power, if we have the will to do it, to move forward. So I apologize a little. I'm feeling extremely passionate right now based on everything that I've come to know about this pandemic, and to be part of it and to be able to help guide our school district and our community forward. I feel an amazing level, an incredible pressing responsibility for the welfare and safety and all different measures of it for the families and for our staff and everyone associated with Clarkston schools. And my hands are tight on the wheel right now. They are tight on the wheel moving forward. And I, every day, learn something more. I become a little bit more vested in my understanding. And that although I can't control the path of this pandemic or the virus activity, I can continue to educate myself and my team and continue to make solid recommendations, decisions as we move forward. So I want to thank you, President Horst, for your continued trust. And I can tell our community and our staff listening in that this Thursday will be a big day, because I'm going to get the last weekly data report in my multiple weeks, because whether our community knows this or not, my number one job duty per week in terms of time commitment and energy is COVID, every single week for now going on a year. And this week, when I meet with our health department officials for weekly updates and numbers, I'm going to get strong answers that we continued on the path that we have. I'm going to make sure that any kind of information on variants or anything else that comes up that's germane and needs to be incorporated under decision making will be evaluated and immediately pressed into moving our decision forward. And then if there's not any surprises this week, we are on a course for a week from today to be in full in-person learning. I wish I could say that that's going to be the end of the story, but as I said at the beginning of my story this evening, it's going to be a continued work in progress. And I'm going to do my best, because one other thing I've learned about through the COVID, it's not a week that breaks you and makes you go into a different modality, back into hybrid or full distance learning. It's a trend. If you look at the graphs I've shared with our community this past week, the virus is not random. It's almost, as some of my epidemiologist friends and as we engaged in it, it's almost like a living thing unto itself. It's like it follows a pattern. And obviously our behavior, mostly outside of school, has great impact on the overall tract of that virus, but it can be followed. And in words that I would use, managed, if done correctly. So with all things, warts included, I've calculated all the ideas and challenges that we've had, including challenges of class sizes that we'll have it. So we'll have minimum social distancing, and also the challenges in a first or kindergarten classroom where students might be small in the classroom, but the way they interact, throughout the day, it's hard to say they're going to stay in exactly bubbles. All this calculated in with our mask wearing and everything else yields a recommendation. It's based on reality, and it's based on, again, those schools across the country. So I feel very comfortable with that final fail-safe this Thursday. And I'm telling everybody in the community and our board tonight, if I see things I don't like and I'm surprised, or things take us in a different direction later this week, and any of those elements, including quarantining, I will react to that information, and I'm not afraid, and I will move forward for the welfare of everyone. So again, more to come on this story. I'm hoping that we continue on the track, and how excited I'll be next week to see our kids back in school, something we haven't seen in a full basis and going on a year. So thank you for your time, and I'd be willing to entertain from our board any questions. Nitty gritty, I'm ready to be able to answer nose to nose on anything that might be a concern or thought that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ryan. I got caught in the school drop-off traffic outside of Springfield Plains this morning on my way to a doctor's appointment. I thought it was the happiest sight I had seen in a long time, where a whole bunch of school buses and a whole bunch of little ones marching into school with their parents. I just grinned from ear to ear and didn't even care that I was late to where I was going. I thought it was a tremendous sight. Trustees, any questions or comments for Dr. Ryan?
Dr.
Mr.
Ryan,
Neate?
thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation, and I agree with your recommendation wholeheartedly. One question that's been asked to me a couple of times: a student who is in quarantine, what do they do while they're at home? How do they receive their lessons? Can they go to distance learning, or what happens with them?
Thank you. Mr. Neate, I'll provide an answer and a collateral, just making sure that in the bigger picture, people understand our direction on this. When students are in a school mandated quarantine, they will be afforded the opportunity to be able to log into their classes and continue on in a way that will keep them up for the length of their quarantine the best that we can through that, that co-instruction. Although it's not the most effective way, obviously, than be face-to-face, but we're certainly not going to cut our students that are out on quarantine out of our educational picture. This will not be afforded on a day-to-day basis for students that are absent or have appointments or have other commitments, nor unfortunately right now, we don't have the capacity to offer this as an alternate educational pathway for students who would rather at this point did not elect to do our virtual school and rather just do day-to-day distance learning. Part of the reason, we looked at, our teachers have done an amazing job with hybrid in providing those type of opportunities, but just the basic practicality for our teachers. If you're trying to service group of students in front of you and also looking at a group of students that are on a screen, our teachers, to the best of their ability, can only put their attention at one place at one moment at one time. And although they can have a screen going, the commitment by our teachers is incredible, where they try to give everybody a great experience. And I think that although I think they did their best through this and we've had a lot of success, some success, it's not been a loss, that it is not the modality that we're going to continue on. And but we'll have that opportunity for students that are in forced quarantine by our school system.
Thank you.
And I would note, even the parents we've heard from this weekend who are concerned about, this transition and a little bit hesitant about it, I think have been very pointed in their praise for our teachers through this time, through this hybrid. So I do want to acknowledge that the parents that are writing us are very appreciative of the efforts of our teachers and have been significant in their praise for them. Any other comments from trustees or questions for Dr. Ryan? All right, thank you, Dr. Ryan. We'll continue on with our agenda. We'll move on to presentation items. We have none tonight. Action items. 6.1 is approval of personnel changes. May I have a motion, please?
I move the Board of Education approves the personnel changes as listed on the attached sheets.
Support.
Are there any questions or discussion? I see Mr. Lucido has joined us this evening. Any questions for him on the personnel changes? All right, seeing none. Mrs. McLean, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Mrs. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Heyer,
Yes.
Mr. Need,
Yes.
Ms. Catalina,
Yes.
Mrs. Crane,
Yes.
Mrs. Egan,
Yes.
Mrs. Horst.
Yes, the motion carries. Item 6.2 is approval of the extended COVID-19 learning plan. May I have a motion, please?
I move the Board of Education approve the district's extended COVID-19 learning plan as presented.
Support.
I believe the only update, Mrs. Mahoney, the only update is our intended return to full-time instruction next week. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And a reminder, this is our monthly commitment per the legislature to approve. And although it's only been a couple of weeks, no, we did approve this last month. This is our January approval. We will approve it again in a couple of weeks in February at our only February meeting. Any other questions or comments from the board? Mrs. McLean, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Ms. Catalina,
Yes.
Mr. Heyer,
Yes.
Mrs. Egan,
Yes.
Mrs. Crane,
Yes.
Mrs. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Need,
Yes.
Mrs. Horst.
Yes, the motion carries. And item 6.3 is approval of the paraeducator contract. May I have a motion, please?
I move the Board of Education approves the proposed master agreement between Clarkson Community Schools and the Clarkson Para Educators Association as presented.
Support.
Are there any questions or discussion from the board? All right, seeing none, Mrs. McLean, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Need,
Yes.
Mrs. McGinnis,
Yes.
Ms. Catalina,
Yes.
Mrs. Egan,
Yes.
Mr. Heyer,
Yes.
Mrs. Crane,
Yes.
Mrs. Horst.
Yes, the motion carries. Thank you very much. We'll move on to report items. Item 7.1, our monthly finance report. Dr. Ryan and Mrs. Rogers.
Monthly financial update report will be covering November and December, ending December 31st, 2020. Our budget to actual revenues are just over 40%, and our budget to actual expenditures are pretty much at 40%. As I've stated, I think in prior months, our budget to actual revenues are showing to be better than our expenses due to, if you look at the federal revenue, it's all that one-time money. We continue to receive one-time money. We've received it from Oakland schools, we've received it from the federal government, and we've received it from the state. So we are right now at 167%. So we're at 67% over what we budgeted at this point for federal revenue. So that is also affecting our fund equity, which if you look at our December 31st, 2020 fund equity, it continues to go up, and it's up at 10.6 million, but that is due to approximately 5 million of one-time money that we've already received. So do you have any questions on any of the check registers, any of the revenue expense reports that have been provided to you?
Trustees, are there any questions on any of the financial reports for Mrs. Rogers? No, I think you did a great job qualifying what were sort of the obvious questions there with the high percentages. So thank you very much, Mrs. Rogers.
You're welcome.
All right, great. We'll move on. Item 8 is discussion items. There are none tonight. Item 9 is citizen comments. Citizens are welcome to address the board on any topic at this time. So if there are any citizens in the audience who wish to address the board at this time, I will give you just a couple of moments to indicate your interest by raising hands. I already see a couple of citizens who have done that. So just remember that you click on the attendee button in the raise hand feature, or just the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. And please remember the process for doing so. When we activate you, if you will please state your name, and you will have approximately 2 minutes to address the board.
And we won't respond.
Oh, right. Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. High, for reminding. This is one way. We hear your comment, but we do not respond per our policy and as stated on the agenda. So first up tonight is Mary O'Daniel. Ms. O'Daniel, we can hear you and we are ready to hear from you.
Thank you, President Horst. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the board. My name is Mary O'Daniel. I have 2 CHS graduates and 1 in the 8th grade, and he also spends time in CSM Tech at the high school. I apologize in advance. I want to thank Dr. Ryan for all of the hard work and all of the teachers and staff as navigating this pandemic. But I did have one question that I'm hoping someone will think about in the devil in the details of the logistics of returning to school full time. And that is the backpacks and the fact that the lockers are not being used at the junior high and the high school level. The books, the number of books, because books have been assigned and those Chromebooks have been assigned. My son's backpack is probably between 30 and 40 pounds. Twice a week carrying that was one thing. 5 days a week, 6 or more hours a day is a different thing that needs to be considered from a wellness perspective, from an ergonomic perspective, and the safety of these kids who have developing bones and bodies. So I'm just hoping that someone will take that into consideration and maybe provide some ideas, alternatives, opportunities for these kids to offload those backpacks in some fashion during the school day when they go back, hooray, 5 days a week. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comments. Right, next we have Team Dubeck. Great, we can hear you. If you'll state your name.
Hello
and you have
there.
2 minutes. Hi there.
Hi, my name is Susie Dubeck. My husband and I have 4 children, 2 at the primary level and 2 at the secondary level. As a former educator and an avid optimist, I've always appreciated the dedication of the board and the administration in Clarkston on focusing on the whole child. As a passionate teacher and a parent, we continually ask ourselves to stop, reflect, and do a check-in and take action based on what we learn from that reflection. I heard the board asking tonight what they can do to identify the needs of the community. And I ask tonight for you to survey your community. I ask that you survey your teachers, that you survey the parents and the students of what our needs are. I'm here to ask you to survey us mostly because of the slide that I saw from Stacy when she presented, do you see me? Do you hear me? Will you protect me? Will you treat me fairly? I'm asking the board to survey us because I believe after talking with a lot of teachers and after talking with a lot of parents, that there are people in Clarkston that do not feel that they are being listened to right now. I feel that there are teachers and people in this community that are not being heard. And I'm asking you to do a check-in. I'm asking you to do a pause and to do a check-in before we move 100% face-to-face, specifically at the secondary level with the class sizes that we have.
Please wrap up your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Appreciate it very much. Looks like we have one more. Julie, if you'll state your full name and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm just checking. Is my audio coming through for you?
Yes, we can hear you just fine. Thank you.
All right. So my name is Julie Popper. I have 4 kids in the district. I've contacted several times, and I truly love and appreciate the work that you have all done and value and respect the decisions you've had to make. I do want to request that I'm going to kind of go back to what Mr. Ryan stated, that no distancing may be possible in certain situations, but if we want to keep kids in school, masking is going to be the #1 mitigation. It came to my knowledge, or I became aware of, let me see, the week before the kids started back, that my son was going to be in class with a student who was unmasked with an exemption. While I appreciate that there are valid reasons for that, I do know that other districts surrounding Clarkston, if they have a virtual option, they require that students that cannot wear a mask in a general education setting are in the virtual program. And that's because masking is a common good. We do this in order to keep the schools open, to keep staff, students, and their families safe. It is an accommodation to offer the virtual option. It is not violating their rights by requiring that that is the choice they make in order to protect the others who are in that classroom. So I'm asking you as a board, and I wish we would have done this earlier because you've already approved the return to learn, but I'm asking you to consider looking at what other districts are doing with masking and understanding that we have made a lot of sacrifices as families to keep our kids safe and to make decisions in order to keep the schools open. And when our kids are going back with students who are unmasked, that feels a bit like they're being put at an undue risk. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Next, we have Heather. If you'll state your full name, please, and you'll have 2 minutes. If you'll unmute on your end, we're ready to hear from you. Oh, did we lose her? Okay. All right, that looks like all of the citizens who wish to address the board this evening. Thank you so much for attending and participating. We appreciate very much hearing from you. Item 10 is information items. 10.1 is our next Board of Education meeting. It's Monday, February 8th. It says time and format to be determined, but we have since been informed, of course, that we are still under orders to meet virtually through at least February 21st. So we will stick with this format at 5:30, 5:30 start time, trustees. So count on that. Item 11 is adjournment. May I have a motion, please?
Move to adjourn.
Support.
Mrs. McLean, may I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Crane,
Yes.
Mrs. Egan,
Yes.
Ms. Catalina,
Yes.
Mr. Need,
Yes.
Mr. Hire,
Yes.
Mrs. McGinnis,
Yes.
and Mrs. Horst.
Yes, the motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Good night.